Beneath the freezing waters of Baffin Bay, a multi-megaton ghost is missing from the history books. The military calls it a broken arrow, a classified code for a lost nuclear weapon. For over 50 years, the Pentagon has sworn the threat was neutralized. But declassified thermal anomalies, abruptly abandoned search logs, and a trail of political silence tell a chillingly different story. Welcome to the modern ledger. Today we expose Operation Chrome Dome and the night humanity played Russian roulette with its own survival. To understand how a weapon capable of vaporizing a metropolis could simply vanish, we must return to an era of absolute geopolitical dread. By the late 1950s, the United States military faced a terrifying strategic vulnerability. If the Soviet Union launched a sudden preemptive nuclear strike, it could wipe out America's ground-based missile silos and bomber bases before a retaliatory strike could even be ordered. The response to this existential threat was a strategy of chilling simplicity and immense danger. Operation Chrome Dome. Beginning in 1960, the Strategic Air Command initiated a continuous 24-hour airborne alert. At any given second, on any day of the year, a fleet of colossal B-52 Stratofortress bombers hovered in the skies. These giants carried up to 4 fully armed thermonuclear weapons, flying predetermined routes that traced the edges of Soviet airspace. The logic was clear. Even if the American continent was reduced to ash, these airborne arsenals would survive to deliver a devastating second strike. They were the ultimate deterrent, a steel ring of destruction encircling the globe, waiting for a signal that everyone hoped would never come. But this strategy relied on a human element pushed to its absolute physical limits. The pilots of these missions operated under a crushing weight of exhaustion. Flights routinely lasted 24 hours, requiring complex, high-stakes mid-air refuelings over turbulent oceans in total darkness. Inside the cramped, vibrating cockpit of a B-52, the atmosphere was a heavy mix of monotonous engine hum, stale coffee, and quiet panic. Beneath the floorboards of the crew deck sat millions of tons of explosive potential, a constant reminder that a single mechanical failure or a moment of human fatigue could trigger the end of civilization. For years, the military ran this operation with mechanical precision. But statistics have a cold way of catching up with even the most calculated risks. The first major crack in the illusion of absolute safety occurred on a freezing morning in January 1966. A B-52 bomber carrying 4 B-28 thermonuclear bombs cruised over the Mediterranean Sea on a routine Chrome Dome mission. At 31,000 feet, the bomber prepared for a standard mid-air refueling with a KC-135 tanker near the quiet Spanish fishing village of Palomares. The high-altitude rendezvous was always a dance with catastrophe. In the absolute silence of the upper atmosphere, the margins of survival shrank to zero. When the massive bomber aligned with the tanker, the illusion of safety dissolved in an instant. The approach went catastrophically wrong. The bomber came in too fast, rising above the tanker and losing its safety margin. Within seconds, the refueling boom collided with the B-52's fuselage, tearing the wing completely from the bomber and igniting a blinding fireball that destroyed both planes instantly. Debris, burning jet fuel, and 4 thermonuclear weapons began a long, uncontrolled descent toward the Earth, falling through the quiet European sky. 3 of the weapons slammed into the agricultural land near Palomares. While safety mechanisms successfully prevented a nuclear explosion, The conventional explosives inside two of the bombs detonated on impact, shattering their casings and dispersing highly toxic plutonium dust over hundreds of acres of Spanish farmland. The wind caught the radioactive particles, scattering them across crops and homes, turning a quiet agricultural village into a modern hot zone. The fourth bomb, however, bypassed the land entirely, plunging into the deep, uncharted canyons of the Mediterranean Sea. The loss of the fourth weapon triggered an immediate geopolitical crisis of unprecedented scale. If rival intelligence agencies located the bomb first, they would gain invaluable insights into America's most advanced nuclear designs, rendering the entire Western deterrent obsolete. The United States Navy launched a frantic, covert recovery operation, deploying state-of-the-art deep submergence vehicles to scan the jagged underwater terrain. For 80 days, the world held its breath as divers and submersibles searched the silent depths. When the weapon was finally hauled to the surface, the relief in Washington was immense, but the incident served as a stark warning. The Chrome Dome strategy was a high-stakes gamble with global survival. Yet the machinery of the Cold War was too massive to halt, and the flights continued. 2 years later, that gamble would face its ultimate test in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. It was January 21st, 1968. A B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs was flying a northern route over Baffin Bay, approaching Thule Air Base in Greenland. Greenland, a territory of Denmark, was a vital strategic outpost, home to early warning radar systems designed to detect incoming Soviet missiles. The flight was routine. The sky was pitch black, and the temperature outside the cockpit was a lethal -40 degrees. Inside the cockpit, the crew was battling extreme Arctic conditions. To combat a freezing draft coming from the lower deck, the co-pilot opened a heating vent that drew hot air directly from the engines. But a serious malfunction occurred. The heating system began drawing air through a duct that had been blocked by foam cushions stored by the crew. Within minutes, the cabin filled with dense, acrid smoke, smelling of burning synthetic materials. The fumes quickly blinded the pilots, cutting off their vision, disabling their oxygen systems, and disrupting their communication systems. In the lower deck, the navigators were trapped in absolute pitch-black dark, breathing toxic fumes and relying entirely on the pilot's voice over a failing intercom. Realizing the aircraft was burning out of control, flying blind over the frozen waste, and unable to be landed, the captain made the only decision left to him. He ordered the crew to eject. 6 of the 7 crew members successfully launched themselves into the freezing Arctic night, falling toward the ice below. Left without a pilot, the massive bomber, carrying its lethal cargo of 4 active thermonuclear weapons, continued on its final unguided path through the dark, its engines screaming over the frozen landscape. The B-52 crashed into the frozen expanse of North Star Bay, just 7 miles from the runway of Thule Air Base. The impact was monumental. The plane's fuel tanks, loaded with tens of thousands of gallons of volatile jet fuel, exploded in a towering column of fire that could be seen for miles. The heat of the blast was so intense that it melted through the thick sheet of sea ice, creating a gaping void in the frozen ocean. The bomber and its deadly cargo shattered under the force of the collision, sinking into the freezing, deep waters beneath the ice. Under the cover of the endless polar night, the military launched Project Crested Ice, an unprecedented recovery and cleanup effort. working in brutal conditions where temperatures plunged to 60 degrees below zero and winds reached hurricane force. Search crews used dog sleds and heavy machinery to locate the debris scattered across the shifting ice. The searchers wore heavy parkas and carried Geiger counters that clicked frantically over the black ice. The danger of radiation sickness was constant, and every piece of contaminated snow, ice, and fuselage had to be packed into steel containers and shipped away to prevent an environmental disaster. But as investigators began to meticulously reconstruct the fragments of the recovered weapons back in secure laboratories, a horrifying realization dawned on them. They could only account for the remnants of 3 of the bombs. The 4th weapon, a fully functional thermonuclear device, was entirely missing. It had not left behind the same physical footprint as the others on the surface, and its heavy core was nowhere to be found among the recovered debris. A secret underwater search was initiated, utilizing manned submersibles to scan the seabed beneath the shifting ice sheets. Officially, the military reports eventually concluded that all 4 weapons had been destroyed in the impact, arguing that the nuclear material had been dispersed and neutralized by the explosion. But classified documents, declassified decades later, revealed a far more unsettling mystery. The search for the missing weapon had not been completed to satisfaction. The search for the 4th weapon had been quietly abandoned, not because it was proven destroyed, but because of the extreme danger of the mission. The military had detected a massive thermal anomaly and a heavy metal object resting deep within the silt of Baffin Bay. But the extreme depth, shifting ice sheets, and treacherous currents made recovery virtually impossible with the technology of the era. Rather than risk a public admission of failure, which would have sparked international outrage and violated agreements with Denmark, the Pentagon chose to close the file and seal the records. Today, the true fate of that 4th weapon remains one of the Cold War's most enduring and dangerous mysteries. Did it burn up completely in the jet fuel inferno? Or does a largely intact thermonuclear device sit buried beneath layers of Arctic silt, slowly being claimed by the ocean floor? The official narrative assures us of safety, but the declassified anomalies suggest a much darker reality. Rather than risk a public admission of failure and violate international treaties with Denmark, the Pentagon chose to close the file and seal the records. But a thermal anomaly doesn't just vanish. Did that 4th weapon truly burn up in a jet fuel inferno? Or is a multi-megaton relic still waiting in the dark? What else do you think is locked inside the classified vaults of the Cold War? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe to the Modern Ledger Files, and remember, history is rarely as clean as they tell you.